So last week, Kevin kicked off a brand new series called Mysterious Wonder. And today I get to continue reading from a passage in the book of John and talking about the creativity of God. Now, I like both these words, mystery and wonder, and they come up a lot at Journey. First, because when you think of the mystery of God, it's this idea that there is so much to know. God, not just know about God, but there's so much to know about who God is as a person, in his character. And the more we get to know God, the deeper we move through the mystery. And of course, I love the word wonder because I think it's something we, as a child, you're full of wonder. And Jesus often references children in the kingdom and says, come like a child. I think we're meant to maintain a spirit of wonder. And so I'm looking forward to being a part of this series, and this passage it's a story perhaps you're familiar with. My goal for our conversation today is to show you the layers of symbolic meaning wedged into a simple story in the Bible. And my hope is that you will see the mysterious wonder of God being displayed through his creativity. So John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My time has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. And then he told them, "Now draw out some and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink, but you have saved the best till now." This, the first of his miraculous signs, Jesus performed at Cana in Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. Now, at first blush, we go, well, it's a miracle. Jesus turned water into wine. That's pretty spectacular. Somehow, using his accessing some kind of divine gift, there was this transition of something like plain water into something as flavorful as wine. That's miraculous. It's beautiful. And it is. But there's a lot more going on here. And I thought we'd take another run through the passage slowly, and let me unpack some of the pieces that are here that connect all the way back into the Old Testament, and then are also also a little bit of foreshadowing to what's going to come. And truthfully, even to this present day, there is so much packed in here. Now, first, a little frame of reference, some context. This is really the very beginning of Jesus' ministry. He's had an interaction with his cousin John, who's baptized him. He's been through a temptation from the evil one. And now here he is with friends and family at a party, which I think is important to point out. Jesus is at a party, and he's partying at the party. That's what you do when you go to parties. And we should probably talk a little bit about a Jewish wedding celebration. A Jewish wedding celebration, think about it like this. For someone who grew up in Palestine, especially for those who are poor, this was more than the 15 minutes of fame. This was a week where they were where if you were if you were the bride or the groom, you were the honored couple. You were the honored person. This was kind of this is your moment to be a celebrity, and maybe your only moment in a lifetime. So, as you can imagine, children look forward to the time when they would get married. It was reflected back on. People told stories about it. It was a major deal. It would start sometime in the evening. There'd be a huge feast. Then there would be a procession. The groom would go and collect the bride. He'd bring her back. There'd be a huge celebration. The days that followed, the entertainment would continue. The bride and the groom would sometimes even wear clothing like they were the king and the queen for a week, and they'd say things that, like their word was law. I mean, like it was just a huge dramatic spectacle. So when we climb into this story and Mary identifies something that's really a crisis, it's a big deal. So we'll run back through the front end of it, and I'll highlight it as we get to it. So Cana of Galilee, on the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. This is the northern part of Israel. Galilee is the area, the Sea of Galilee. So this is a little town near that sea, not far from Jesus' hometown of Nazareth. So the wedding couple, the bride and groom, they were probably friends. They could have even been cousins. But a lot of the folks, Jesus and his disciples, they would have known them. And Jesus' mother was there, and the indication here is that she was probably involved in the planning. We don't know if she's Jennifer Lopez. I don't know if she's the wedding planner particularly, or the coordinator, but she's involved. She's aware of what's happening. So Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding when the wine was gone. Now, I think that's interesting. I don't know if it was like a last-minute invitation, and they're like, hey, your disciples can really throw down. But we're not exactly sure why they run out of wine, but it is interesting, the very next line after the fact that Jesus and his disciples showed up, they ran out. And Jesus' mother says to him, they have no more wine. Now, this is where this gets really interesting. So first of all, let's understand the context of what's happening in real time for the bride and groom. If they run out of wine, it's not just slightly embarrassing. It's shameful. It would be dishonoring to their guests. And to the degree that in Palestine at that time, like there could be a lawsuit against you because you didn't have enough wine. It was part of the expectation of the giving and the receiving of a wedding experience. People would bring gifts, they'd have wine. Now, along with what's happening, kind of the crisis in the moment at the wedding, let's catch what's happening symbolically. Right here, in this moment, Jesus' mother shows up, and she says, they have no more wine. Now, here's what's really interesting. There are lots of kind of theological perspectives on this passage, so you could find some people that might differ a little bit with some of this. But the implication here is that Mary, in some ways, is the voice of Israel. And she's saying, we have no more joy. When you hear they have no more wine, wine is symbolically used for joy often. This comes up a great deal throughout the scripture. But you could hear they have no more joy, which is certainly an indication of the state of the nation of Israel at that time. They've been longing for a Messiah. They have been longing to be rescued. So when you hear that, think they have no more joy. Jesus responds, and he doesn't call her mother, interestingly enough. He says, dear woman, why do you involve me? My time has not yet come. Now, there's one other time that Jesus identifies Mary as, and he refers to her as woman, and it's when he's on the cross, later on in the book of John. And there, again, this kind of adds some validity to the fact that Mary is symbolically representing someone more than just herself in this moment. That we have right here in this moment a picture of bride and bridegroom. Jesus is coming as the divine bridegroom, and he is bringing new wine. He is coming to be the restorer of all good things. He is bringing joy, and he's bringing it to the bride, the nation of Israel, which would eventually transform into what we refer to as the church. So there are a lot of implications in this one statement and what follows. Jesus responds with a question about timing. Mary's response, his mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Now, to me, this is playful. I don't know exactly all that's happening in this moment, but Mary clearly is saying, Jesus, I know you haven't started doing like signs and wonders and miracles and stuff yet, but I know it's in you, and this would be a really great time to start. Jesus responds, not sure about the timing. Mary says, okay, well maybe, and I think what I hear in Mary is, I don't know exactly how this is going to go down, but I still think you'll do something. And so she just looks over at the servants and says, do whatever he tells you. which indicates she had some kind of authority. This is why I think, she was in the Jennifer Lopez role or whatever. But here she is. So the servants look at Jesus. Jesus looks at them. And it says, nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. And Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. Now, this is important. Ceremonial washing jars. These are stone. They're not clay jars. They're stone jars. That's an important delineation because for Jews, they had a ritual. It was a purification ritual. Before they would eat, they would cleanse their hands with the water, and it was symbolic of coming to break bread with a form of cleanliness. Now, not only was that a ritual, there were all kinds of rituals that were part of the Jewish way of doing life. But the rituals were not producing life. Living according to these specific laws, Jews weren't finding hope. And ultimately, what's indicated here is this new wine was going to be better than what was there previously. And we'll catch that in what the master of the banquet says. He speaks that out pretty clearly. So Jesus says, take these ceremonial jars, what was previously used for cleansing, and I want you to turn it into wine. Jesus has a conversation with his disciples right before he dies. He has a final moment where they're breaking bread. And he says, take this cup and do so in remembrance of me. For this wine that you drink is my blood. There is wedged in. You see the layers here? This is what makes the Bible so much fun. The layers here is, the implication is not only is Jesus coming bringing joy, but he's also coming bringing redemption. And the redemption is going to come through his own shed blood. So you have this metaphor of joy and blood wrapped up in this idea of wine. And the ceremonial jars truly are the containers, new wine and new wineskins, new wine in a new context. They're the containers. This old way of doing these old rituals, it doesn't do anything for you. I've come to fulfill that, redeem that, change that. He turns the water into wine. He tells them, draw out some and take it to the master of the banquet. They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Now, this part right here is maybe one of my favorite parts in the passage. The master of ceremony is probably an honored guest or a brother or, father or someone. And I picture this guy as a bit of a gregarious guy. He's the guy who's going to give the toast. He's the guy in the know. He might be a patriarch in the town or in the family. And it says he did not realize where it had come from. So it's a little bit like the joke's on him. He doesn't fully know what's going on. And the very next line is, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. So here are the guys the wallflowers, the ones standing in the margins, the one no one pays any attention to, the ones without influence or any kind of religious clout. They're the ones in the know. They're the ones who got the information first. And this is consistent all throughout Scripture. Remember when the announcement came that Jesus was going to be born? Who was it made to? It was made to the equivalent of today, like the guys who run the carnival rides, like the shepherds. These were the guys who, they were nomadic. They were always traveling. They were not highly regarded in their society. That's who the message came to. When Jesus came to the planet for rescue and redemption, restoration, all these things we're talking about. This is thematic. If you think you know everything, you probably don't. Jesus is constantly using the foolish to astound the wise. He's going to the people who would clearly go, I don't have it all together. Life, I don't have everything on lockdown. I can't control everything. I'm in great need. See, he's looking for servants. These servants are the first to experience the very first miracle and sign that Jesus would perform. And the sign is really the better word. Sign is because it's symbolic of something more to come. Now, it's a miracle that takes place, certainly, but see the sign for what it is, and they're in the know. And I hope you'll hear this, because I think it's important for all of us. Those who go, I don't have what it takes. I don't know if I'm going to be successful, and I feel like I'm on the margins. Please hear in this and throughout Scripture. Wonderful. Then you're primed and ready to be used. And if you feel like, well, my story isn't worth anything, it's a boring story, or no, my story's not boring, it's actually quite dramatic and it's filled with a lot of shame. Over and over, God, this is who God's coming to use. He's choosing those who are in the margins, who are in the background. And so please hear, like, if you're a mother and you're going, I spent the last 15 years just being a mom. I mean, just doing the thing. And what now? Please still be filled with hope and recognize that perhaps you are contributing to the kingdom in ways you didn't fully understand, and that there's more to give. It's not necessarily about being on a stage or wearing a microphone. It's about trusting Him. And when He says, hey, just go fill those water pots, go fill the water pot. You never know what miracle you might be a part of. Well, they do. They fill it to the brim, and I think this point is made for a reason. John 10:10, Jesus comes to give us an abundant life. He says, fill it up. And know this about these water pots. Not only is there wine for the moment, but it's 120, 180 gallons of wine, depending on who you read and how they translate the numbers. It's not just wine for the moment. It's a wedding gift. He has left them with a massive amount of wine that they can sell and they can use. So it's actually quite a gift. It kind of feels like it covers him and the disciples. In my mind, I'm like, hey, Peter, you drank too much. Jesus is going to cover that. I don't know how it works, but it's a gift. And along with, of course, being the miracle that it is. So then he calls to the bridegroom, this is the master of ceremonies, called the bridegroom aside and said, everyone brings out the choice wine first and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. Now, to be clear, I don't think this is like a reference to, now that everybody's drunk, you brought out the good wine. I don't think that's what he's referring to. I think he's referring more to the palate. That, hey, typically, when you start off the meal with the best stuff, where everybody's most sensitized to it. But you've saved the best for last. Again, it's not hard to see the symbolism in this. For all these years in this Jewish heritage, they've been doing whatever they could to try and somehow earn their way toward God. God has been sending a message of grace saying, it's not something you earn, and I'm coming. And this is the moment. Set in the context of a party, set in the context of a celebration, set in the context of a wedding. This is the moment where the best has now come to be. Throughout Scripture, you've got the Adam and Eve in the garden, which is a marriage of sorts. When you get to the last book in the Bible, Revelation, the marriage supper of the Lamb, which indicates there is this moment post-earth where God gathers all of his followers. It's like there's this huge feast where we celebrate what it has meant to live a life following Jesus. So the Bible's framed in the metaphor of marriage. And then all the way through it, you get this picture that Jesus is a bridegroom. You've got this erotic love story in the Song of Solomon. If you're 14 and you didn't know that was in the Bible, I just gave you kind of a heads up. But there's all these things wedged into Scripture about love and about romance. And Jesus he's set up as this picture of a bridegroom who is romancing his bride. This is a love story. It's not a condemnation story. It's a love story. And what happens when Jesus comes to the planet, decides to begin to reveal himself to everybody? It happens at a wedding. That we can't miss that. That doesn't need to be lost on us, because what a beautiful symbolic moment when you read this passage. And finally, kind of the summary of the experience. This is the first of his miraculous signs Jesus performed at Cana in Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. Jesus revealed his glory at a wedding, at a celebration, at a party. Matter of fact, later on as he walks through life, he gets accused of partying too much. The religious folks say that he drinks too much and he parties too much. That's one of the accusations thrown his way. But Jesus comes and begins his ministry in the context of a celebration. He is a man of sorrow. We know that he will go and he will suffer and he will die. But the tenor of his life is lived in joy. We suffer too because we're followers of Jesus. But let us not miss the joy that is accessible to us and the joy that's meant to be a part of our lives. The old wine is gone. The new wine is here. And what does that mean for us as a church? This wonderful passage to put new wine in new wineskins, it started causing us to ask questions about even how we do things. Yeah, well, are there new wineskins for us to experience? And we're about to move into onto a new property. Well, how might things be different? So we got some ideas brewing. We're praying about a lot of different stuff. Please pray with us. I know there's a kind of still a sea of change ahead for us. And of course, that's not that unusual for us. We call this church journey for a reason. But would you pray with us? And would we walk with this anticipation, new wine, new wineskins, what might be different about us as a community, who we are as a church, and who we're meant to be individually? Would your life be one that's filled with joy? There's so much about God. He longs to be known. Experience him through mystery, wonder, and his creative way of revealing himself to the world.